The Life Divine, Chapter 25, The Triple Transformation. If the spirit could from the first dwell securely on the superior heights and deal with the blank and virgin stuff of mind and matter, a complete spiritual transformation might be rapid, even facile. But the actual process of nature is more difficult. The logic of her movement more manifold, contorted, winding, comprehensive. She recognizes all the data of the task she has set to herself and is not satisfied with a summary triumph over her own complexities. Every part of our being has to be taken in its own nature and character, with all the molds and writings of the past still there in it. Each minutest portion and movement must either be destroyed and replaced if it is unfit, or if it is capable, transmuted into the truth of the higher being. If the psychic change is complete, this can be done by a painless process, though still the program must be long and scrupulous, and the progress deliberate. But otherwise one has to be satisfied with a partial result, or, if one's own scrupulousness of perfection or hunger of the spirit is insatiable, consent to a difficult, often painful, and seemingly interminable action. For ordinarily the consciousness does not rise to the summits, except in the highest moments. It remains on the mental level and receives descents from above. Sometimes a single descent of some spiritual power that stays and molds the being into something predominantly spiritual, or a succession of descents bringing into it more and more of the spiritual status and dynamis. But unless one can live on the highest height reached, there cannot be the complete or more integral change. If the psychic mutation has not taken place, if there has been a premature pulling down of the higher forces, their contact may be too strong for the flawed and impure material of nature, and its immediate fate may be that of the unbaked jar of the Veda, which could not hold the divine Soma wine. Or the descending influence may withdraw or be spilt because the nature cannot contain or keep it. Again, if it is power that descends, the egoistic mind or vital may try to seize on it for its own use, and a magnified ego or a hunting after powers and self-aggrandizing masteries may be the untoward result. The Ananda descending cannot be held if there is too much sexual impurity, creating an intoxicant or degrading mixture. The power recedes if there is ambition, vanity, or other aggressive form of lower self. The light, if there is an attachment to obscurity or to any form of the ignorance. The presence, if the chamber of the heart has not been made pure. So these are the conditions that Sri Aurobindo is laying down for this power to descend from above into the mind. And it recedes, even if there is a descent, that descent may not stay or may be a one-off or whatever, unless these conditions are maintained and followed. What are they? So, he says, if the psychic mutation has not taken place, if there has been a premature pulling down of the higher forces, their contact may be too strong for the flawed and impure material of nature, and its immediate fate may be that of the unbaked jar of the Veda, which could not hold the divine Soma wine. Or the descending influence may withdraw or be spilt because the nature cannot contain or keep it. Okay? Again, if it is power that descends, the egoistic mind or vital may try to seize on it for its own use, and a magnified ego or a hunting after powers and self-aggrandizing masteries may be the untoward result. The Ananda descending cannot be held if there is too much sexual impurity, creating an intoxicant or degrading mixture. The power recedes if there is ambition, vanity, or other aggressive form of lower self. The light recedes if there is an attachment to obscurity or to any form of the ignorance. The presence again recedes if the chamber of the heart has not been made pure, or some undivine force may try to seize hold, not of the power itself, for that has withdrawn, but of the result of forces it leaves behind in the instrument, and use it for the purposes of the adversary. Even if none of these more disastrous faults or errors should take place, still the numerous mistakes of reception or the imperfections of the vessel may impede the transformation. The power has to come at intervals and work meanwhile behind the veil, or hold itself back through long periods of obscure assimilation or preparation of the recalcitrant parts of nature. The light has to work in darkness or semi-darkness on the regions in us that are still in the night. At any moment, the work may be stayed, personally for this life, because the nature is able to receive or assimilate no more, for it has reached the present limits of its capacity, or because the mind may be ready, but the vital, when faced with the choice between the old life and the new, refuses. Or if the vital accepts, the body may prove to be too weak, unfit or flawed for the necessary change of its consciousness and its dynamic transformation. So these may happen. This is a very what should I say? This is really what is going on, and often happens. You'll see in Pondicherry with many sadhaks. This is a very, very practical explanation is given. So if the mind is ready, the vital refuses to change. It refuses to give up the old life and embrace the new life. Unless it does that, there is no transformation. And then again, the body itself, it has to be strong enough to hold that power. So again, the body, if it's too weak or obscure or unfit or flawed for the necessary change, then again it does not take place. But now you understand why the ashram is organized that way. Why is there a physical education department? Why are there games for all sadhaks from 2 years old to 100 years old? What is the role of the body and in this yoga? Then again, the sublimation of the vital, the purification of desire and of ambition and of all of that. And then, of course, the mental being. So, again, what Sri Aurobindo is pointing out there is the importance of the psychic presence and coming forward of the psychic. Now, the mother's agency is there and is the only way to do that. Sri Aurobindo says that my yoga cannot be done without the mother's aid. Now, have you seen this film we made, multimedia here? The Mother, Force and Action? This year. You saw it, 28th of March. Moreover, the necessity of working out the change separately in each part of the being, in its own nature and character, compels the consciousness to descend into each in turn and act there according to its state and its possibility. If the work were done from above, from some spiritual height, there might be a sublimation or uplifting of the creation of a new structure compelled by the sheer force of the influence from above. But this change might not be accepted as native to itself by the lower being. It would not be a total growth, an integral evolution, but a partial and imposed formation, affecting or liberating some parts of the being, suppressing others or leaving them as they were, a creation from outside the normal nature by imposition upon it. It could be durable in its entirety only as long as there was a maintenance of the creating influence. Therefore, he says, a descent of consciousness into the lower levels is therefore necessary. But in this way also it is difficult to work out the full power of the higher principle. There is a modification, dilution, diminution, which keeps up an imperfection and limitation in the results. The light of a greater knowledge comes down, but gets blurred and modified, its significance misinterpreted, or its truth mixed with mental and vital error, or the force, the power to fulfill itself is not commensurate with its light. A light and power of the overmind, working in its own full right and in its own sphere, is one thing. The same light working in the obscurity of the physical consciousness and under its conditions is something quite different, and owing to dilution and mixture, far inferior in its knowledge and force and results. A mutilated power, a partial effect, or hampered movement is the consequence. So is that clear? Any questions? Comments? First is going coming in. No, first is inwardization, and then second is that coming forth, then going up, and then going down. And these three could happen simultaneously. Third is the descent, second is the ascent, and the first is the psychic, the inwardization, to go deep inwards to find the psychic entity. But just to see where it's written so it's clear, no harm. Check it out. Third is the descent. First is, that is within the descent that the permanent ascension. Yes, happening. Yeah, it's a simultaneous process of all three. But what Sri Aurobindo is constantly trying to say is that please go first with the psychic if you want to have a safe journey. So that the psychic helps. Okay, so where were we? What paragraphs, darling? This is indeed the reason of the slow and difficult emergence of the consciousness. So this is the reason for the slow and difficult emergence. This indeed, what indeed is a reason? The immixture, the overmind is not working in its own full right, but it's working in the obscurity of the physical consciousness, and under its conditions is sometimes quite different owing to dilution and mixture, far inferior in its knowledge and force and results. A mutilated power, partial effect, or hampered movement is the consequence. This is indeed the reason of the slow and difficult emergence of the consciousness force in nature. For mind and life have to descend into matter and suit themselves to its conditions, changed and diminished by the obscurity and reluctant inertia of the substance and force in which they work. They are not able to make a complete transformation of their material into a fit instrument and a changed substance, revelatory of their real and native power. So the reason for the slow and difficult emergence of the consciousness force, Chit Shakti, in nature is because mind and life have had to, in the evolutionary nature, in evolution, have descended into matter. And because of that descent into matter, they've descended also and become diminished by the obscurity and reluctant inertia of the substance and force in which they have had to work. They are not able to make a complete transformation of their material into a fit instrument and a changed substance, revelatory of their real and native power. So therefore, mind and life itself have lost their native power. The life consciousness is unable to effectuate the greatness and felicity of its mighty or beautiful impulses in the material existence. Its impetus fails it. Its force of effectuation is inferior to the truth of its conceptions. So now he's taken up the life consciousness. He says life consciousness is unable to effectuate any kind of greatness and felicity of its mighty and beautiful impulses in the material existence, in matter. It can't do it. So its force of effectuation is inferior to the truth of its conceptions. The form betrays the life intuition within it, which it tries to render into terms of life being. The mind is unable to achieve its high ideas in the medium of life or matter, without deductions and compromises which deprive them of their divinity. So in a very interesting way, this is very important. In fact, you always wonder, because when you go into the pure mind or pure life planes, as is described in Savitri and also in Life Divine, far more beautifully in Savitri, vividly, where Savitri is traveling into the inner countries. The actual life plane itself there is harmony, there is beauty, there are two, the higher vital planes are very, very, they're not like what happens to us in our life, in matter. So the true life and the true mind are far higher in their evolutionary, vibratory manifestation, or in their prototype, than mind and life as manifested in earthly nature, in our body, in our consciousness. Because the true mind and life have not gone through the degradation of entering into nature and the material in matter. They are in a subtle world. So the subtle life and the subtle, you'll see in Savitri, there are many, many cantos of that. So now you understand the paradise of the life gods, if you remember. And of course in mind there are several cantos on that, in books in fact, on the ascent of mind. So even overmind in its own plane, if it was to work, would work far more efficiently and far more effectively than in matter. Therefore, the importance of the supramental or the supermind descending, because that is the power which Sri Aurobindo, the mother says, has the ability, because it's not in the mind or the life plane, it comes from a higher plane, it's a lid between, the two. That is the plane that, this has gone a bit low, no? So, that is the plane that consciousness can change matter, can transform matter. And it is matter that needs transformation, mostly. And then mind and life, of course, into their higher counterparts. Now, that's interesting to understand that concept. Is it clear? Because we tend otherwise to judge mind and life by our own experience of mind and life, and we tend to say, oh, that's, not is impure, is unregenerate, is blah blah blah, dark, obscure, whatever. But or has limitations. Mind, especially life, of course, with all of the the depravities or the obscurities of the life, the vital, the lower vital, and so on. But here Sri Aurobindo is pointing out that is so only because they've entered into matter, right? So we continue. The mind is unable to achieve its high ideas in the medium of life or matter because without deductions and compromises which deprive them of their divinity, its clarities of knowledge and will are not matched by its force to mold this inferior substance to obey and express it. On the contrary, its own powers get affected. Whose own powers? Mind's own powers get affected. Its will is divided, its knowledge confused and clouded by the turbidities of life and the incomprehensiveness of matter. So its knowledge is confused and clouded by the turbidities of life and the incomprehensiveness of matter. Neither life nor mind succeeds in converting or perfecting the material existence. Very important. Neither life nor mind succeeds in converting or perfecting the material existence, because they cannot attain to their own full force in these conditions. They need to call in a higher power to liberate and fulfill them. But the higher spiritual mental powers also undergo the same disability when they descend into life. But these higher powers, these higher spiritual mental powers, spiritual dash mental, so it's spiritual mental, that is up to the overmind, intuitive mind, illumined mind, higher mind, overmind, yes, included. But the higher spiritual mental powers also undergo the same disability when they descend into life and matter. They can do much more, achieve much luminous change, but the modification, the limitation, the disparity between the consciousness that comes in and the force of effectuation that it can mentalize and materialize are constantly there, and the result is a diminished creation. Okay? The change made is often extraordinary. There is even something which looks like a total conversion and reversal of the state of consciousness and an uplifting of its movements, but it is not dynamically absolute. Only the supermind can thus descend. Only the supermind can thus descend without losing its full power of action. So only the supermind can thus descend without losing its full power of action. For its action is always intrinsic and automatic. Its will and knowledge identical, and the result commensurate. Its nature is a self-achieving truth consciousness, and if it limits itself or its working, it is by choice and intention, not by compulsion. In the limits it chooses its action, and the results of its action are harmonious and inevitable. Again, overmind is, like mind, a dividing principle. Okay? Again, overmind is, like mind, a dividing principle, and its characteristic operation is to work out in an independent formation a selected harmony. So it is a dividing principle like mind, and how does it do that? And therefore its characteristic operation is to work out in an independent formation a selected harmony. So it tends to divide and then create harmony in that division. Okay? Its characteristic operation is to work out in an independent formation a selected harmony. Its global action enables it indeed to create a harmony whole and perfect in itself, or to unite or fuse its harmonies together, to synthesize, but laboring under the restrictions of mind, life, and matter, it is obliged to do it by sections and their joinings. So, divisions, parts joining together, not the whole. Sections and their joining, because of the limiting influence of mind, life, and matter. So, a harmony whole and perfect, or to unite it or fuse its harmonies together, to synthesize, but laboring under the restrictions of mind, life, and matter, it is obliged to do it by sections and their joinings. Its tendency of totality is hampered by its selective tendency, which is accentuated by the nature of the mental life material in which it is working here, and life material, by its selective tendency, which is accentuated by the nature of the mental and life material in which it is working here. So, this is accentuated by both mind and life. Again, the same life and mind which is working in matter, and that hampers the tendency of totality in it. Okay? Its tendency of totality is hampered by its selective tendency, which is accentuated by the nature of the mental and life material in which it is working here. What it can achieve is separate, limited, spiritual creations. So, what it can achieve, the overmind, is separate, limited, spiritual creations, each perfect in itself, but not the integral knowledge and manifestation. Now you may recall and understand more clearly. When the mother brought down the overmental consciousness and the overmind and the overmental world into the ashram, in the 1930s, the descent in Nolinida was of Varuna, of the god. And in many people, great overmind gods descended. And she saw this beautiful, almost perfect creation. And she thought, oh my God, this is going to change the world, change human nature. And the whole ashram and everything will be uplifted. And from here onward, it will be easier to continue and bring down the supermind and change of nature. And guess what Sri Aurobindo told her one day? He says, destroy it, break it up. In one word, he said, just get rid of it. This is not where we want to go. We can build a paradise on earth here. The whole of the ashram can be a separate, perfect creation, harmonious and beautiful, with all the powers of the great gods manifested in human nature. But it will not change human consciousness, the collective human consciousness of the world. It will not change the earth consciousness. It will not transform the collective consciousness of the earth. Why? He's just mentioned. Because the overmental consciousness works in sections. It can create something perfect, but it cannot transform and dynamize the whole. So it can work in a particular place where it can be brought down, but it will not transform human nature. And then after that, in the 1930s, when Niruddha joined, Niruddha came after the overmental descent of the 24th of November. And when Sri Aurobindo had already told the mother that get rid of this. I think it was late 1920s that he told. I don't know the exact date. We can find that out. It's given in all the books. So then he said, get rid of this creation. The mother, one go, she writes about it. She says, I went into this world, of course at night in her subtle body, and she says, I got rid of it. I destroyed it. And the whole thing, anyone who had got that descent, it stayed with them. But the rest of them did not have it. And then, anyway, those are more subtle things. We won't talk about them. But come back to the point, which is that, Niruddha came after that. And in the 1930s, what took place after the overmental world was destroyed by the mother herself, who had brought it down, and the overmental gods receded back, and that creation was taken away, that there was an incredible descent, huge descent into what went after that, what Sri Aurobindo wanted to do, go into the subconscious. And after that, the whole sadhana of the ashram changed. All these wonderful spiritual experiences, massive experiences, of the light, of knowledge, of power, of going high above in the scent of consciousness, that God's, these powers are all disappeared, diminished, and went back into becoming a worm and into becoming a reptile in this deep darkness of the subconscious mud, and no higher experience. So all the sadhaks who came after that only complained to Sri Aurobindo about, why have you left us? What are we doing here? Why is it so dry? And so on. So you will understand the letters of yoga and Niruddha's correspondence with Sri Aurobindo now in the light of this huge thing that took place. You understand? Now, Pavitrada, Naulinida, the earlier sadhaks escaped it. Now, so after that, Amal Kiran, they all had to go through all this. This is first time I'm reading this chapter with you all also. I've not read it beforehand coming here or whatever. So I first time realized, this explanation given here for why that happened. I had read all that, but I had not understood why Sri Aurobindo, why did he say, no, get rid of this whole creation? Why did he do that? Couldn't they have from there built up or gone down, continued with those powers? But there was a reason. He said, this, you stay. It's a prototype. No, nobody wants to go down. Beautiful. Yeah. So that had to be completely destroyed. And then back into the mud. Now, so it's very interesting. Again, yes, of course. But the agenda has conversation. Has a certain mental structure and a particular, I find, a logical progression that, helps to understand the agenda more deeply. I don't know if you know what I mean. We have to go back and forth, yeah. Because otherwise you can get lost in the agenda and go into a self. The agenda can also be very, very dangerous and elusive for those who are not ready. Again, overmind is like mind, a dividing principle. And its characteristic operation is to work out in an independent formation a selected harmony. Its global action enables it indeed to create a harmony whole and perfect in itself, or to unite or fuse its harmonies together, to synthesize, but laboring under the restrictions of mind, life and matter, it is obliged to do it by sections and their joinings. Its tendency of totality is hampered by its selective tendency, which is accentuated by the nature of the mental and life material in which it is working here. But what it can achieve is separate, limited, spiritual creations, each perfect in itself, but not the integral knowledge and its manifestation. For this reason, and because of the diminishing of its native light and power, it is unable to do fully what is needed and has to call in a greater power, the supramental force, to liberate and fulfill it. As the psychic change has to call in the spiritual to complete it, so the first spiritual change has to call in the supramental transformation to complete it. Very important. As the psychic change has to call in the spiritual to complete it, so the first spiritual change has to call in the supramental transformation to complete it. For all these steps forward are, like those before them, transitional. The whole radical change in the evolution from a basis of ignorance to a basis of knowledge can only come by the intervention of the supramental power and its direct action in earth existence. This then must be the nature of the third and final transformation, which finishes the passage of the soul through the ignorance and bases its consciousness, its life, its power and form of manifestation on a complete and completely effective self-knowledge. The truth consciousness, finding evolutionary nature ready, has to descend into her. So the truth consciousness, finding evolutionary nature ready, has to descend into her and enable her to liberate the supramental principle within her. So must be created the supramental and spiritual being as the first unveiled manifestation of the truth of the self and spirit in the material universe. So this is the triple transformation. So the psychic, the spiritual, and then the supramental. Then the next chapter is the ascent towards Supermind. Right.